So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. So excited to begin the second day of our historical first international seminar on restorative justice for people with disabilities. This is truly groundbreaking work with a focus on the people with disabilities through a restorative justice lens. It's such an exciting day today. I'm Thomas Borges, Gallaudet University Associate Provost for Student Success Academic Quality here in Washington, D.C. I'll be mediating the panel throughout the webinar today. Remember, there is translation and sign language interpretation throughout the seminar. Just go ahead and choose your language in the Zoom toolbar. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a globe that says interpretation. Click on that. For audience members, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box and we will respond to them as we're able near the end of the session. With those technical aspects out of the way, I do want to recognize and thank this seminar's sponsors. It would not be possible without their valuable support, including the Association of Federal Judges for Brazil, AJUFE, Gallaudet University, Governor's State University, Howard Zare Institute, and the Joe Clementi Institute. Thank you, all of you, for actually investing in this great work. Now we'll begin with our kickoff presentations for today, two amazing scholars in the field of restorative justice. First, I'd like to recognize Professor Howard Zare from the Howard Zare Institute of Eastern Mennonite University. Second, we'll hear from Dr. Daniella Mendez Machado Mendez, General Superintendent of the Joe Clementi Institute. Welcome to you both. Thank you for your time to kick off this amazing second day of our seminar. I'll humbly facilitate your conversation and listen to your perceptions on individuals with disabilities through a restorative justice lens and what your institutions are doing to break down barriers. It's important, though, for us to recognize some of the contributions that you've made to this field that others might not be aware of. Dr. Zare is widely known as the grandfather of restorative justice. He began as a practitioner and theorist in restorative justice in the late 70s at the foundational stage of the field. He's led hundreds of events in more than 25 countries and 35 US states, including trainings, consultations on restorative justice, victim offender conferencing, judicial reform, and other judicial matters. His impact has been especially significant in the United States, Brazil, Japan, Jamaica, Northern Ireland, Britain, and the Ukraine and New Zealand. A country that has restructured its juvenile justice system into a family-focused restorative justice approach. A prolific writer, editor, speaker, educator, and photojournalist, Zare actively mentors other leaders in the field. More than 1,000 people have taken his courses on restorative justice. He was an early advocate of making the needs of victims central to the practice of restorative justice. A core theme in his work is respect for the dignity of all peoples. From 2008 to 2011, he served on the Victims Advisory Group of the US Sentencing Commission. In 2013, he stepped away from active classroom teaching and became co-director with Dr. Carl Stauffer of the new Zare Institute for Restorative Justice. Thank you for being with us today. You have the floor.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And good morning to you all. I bring you greetings from the Center for Justice and Peace Building at Eastern Mennonite University. We're in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, not too far from Washington, D.C. I'm honored to help kick off this second day of this important conference. It's pleased to reconnect with friends and colleagues from Brazil, even though it's only virtually. And I'm very pleased that you're addressing this important and long neglected topic that is the topic of your conference. I've been asked to say a few words about restorative justice, even though with all the expertise you have on these panels, you really don't need me. In fact, I'm largely retired and many of you have gone places with this that I haven't. So many of you know more than I do about this. But I'll make a couple kind of general comments to just frame things here. I think it's really important to make a distinction between restorative justice as a set of practices and restorative justice as a philosophy or a concept or an approach. Too often people think of restorative justice simply as, say, circles or victim offender conferences. And circles can be very restorative, but if they're not done right, they may not be restorative. And circles have, well, restorative justice was initially conceived in situations where harm has been done. But circles can be used in so many situations because they engage everyone in a respectful, equitable way. They allow people to tell their truth. They can be used for consensus decision-making. So circles are important, but they are not the whole story of restorative justice. And they may or may not be done restoratively. So restorative justice is a set of practices, but beyond that, it is an overall philosophy or approach with specific principles and values. And these can be used in situations where there is no practice available, and they can be used to help guide our restorative practice to be what a friend of mine calls principled practice. And we can help make sure our practices are in fact restorative. Essentially, restorative justice is a value-based relational approach to justice. It reminds us that we live in a web of relationships. Now, those of you who come from indigenous backgrounds probably don't need to be reminded of that, but many of us have lost track of that. So restorative justice reminds us that all of us live in a web of relationships, and that how we behave and how we act in that web of relationship has implications and matters. Restorative justice is essentially about how we build, how we maintain, how we restore or repair relationships. It's built on values such as responsibility for our actions and respect for ourselves and others. Again, it's a relational approach to justice and wrongdoing and harm that, first of all, begins by acknowledging harm and addressing the resulting needs. Secondly, emphasizing taking responsibility to acknowledge and repair those harms. And third, maximizes participation, dialogue, collaboration, consensus. As I said, these principles and values can be applied in situations where there is no existing restorative justice programs. My restorative lawyer friends do this. When they come to a case and they ask questions like, who's been hurt? What are their needs and whose obligations are they? How do we process this? Even though there may not be a program, a circle program available or a victim offender conferencing program available. Also, by constantly referring to these principles, we can make sure we don't get off track. You know, the forces that push any good idea off track are great. And the only way we're going to stay true to our goals and our values is by reminding ourselves of principal practice. Some people think of restorative justice as a philosophy of life, a set of values and guidelines for how we live together in this divided and polarized world. These have implications not just for our individual lives, but for society in general. But enough from me. I'll stop there and turn this over to others. It's an honor to be with you today. And I wish you well in your deliberations. I will not be able to stay with you, but I'm very excited that you're doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zaire, for your amazing words. We really appreciate your presence and showing how our restorative justice work must continue, and the foundation you brought to the field that allows us to really deliver a wealth of knowledge and continue carrying that torch for restorative justice. And thank you for reminding us about the intersectional relationships that are important, especially for people with disabilities and the most marginalized among us, about the harm we've done systemically and how we can repair those harms for disabled individuals to become an interwoven part of our society. So thank you so much for your wise words. Our next amazing speaker that I'd like to introduce is Daniella Machado Mendez. She's the General Superintendent of the Joe Clementi Institute. She began as a nurse graduating from the University of Sao Paulo, postgraduate in obstetrics and neonatology from USP, specialization in hospital administration from Fundaco Getulio Vargas, and management of health services from Dom Cabral. She has over 20 years of experience in managing health services, diagnostic medicine, and new businesses, both in private practice and in civil social organizations. She worked for 12 years at DASA, the Diagnostic of the Americas, as the process business manager, and 7 years at the Hospital San Maritano as business manager of diagnostic medicine. She has experience leading large teams, strategic planning, balanced scorecard, Lean Six Sigma, financial economic management. She currently works at the Joe Clementi Institute, formerly APE in Sao Paulo, having started as health services manager and becoming operations superintendent. With that, thank you for your willingness to kick off our opening ceremony. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thomas, it's a great honor to be with you here today, especially speaking after Professor Howard, sir. It's a responsibility that's just huge due to all the experience he has, all the wisdom. It's important for us to discuss this theme, especially in the perspective of people with disabilities. Initially, I'd like to describe myself. I'm a woman with brown hair up to shoulder length. I have brown eyes. I'm wearing a black shirt. I'm sitting down. Behind me, there's a beige wall with a butterfly painting made by some people with intellectual disabilities that work with us. As Thomas already said, I'm the General Superintendent of the Joe Clementi Institute, and we also call it IJC. So if you hear someone saying, oh, those people from IJC, this is us. It's a civil society organization with a nonprofit, and it acts now for 60 years in the cause of intellectual disabilities. It's not easy for a civil society organization to last this long, but we were able to do this, especially because we have, as a whole, our pioneerism, our credibility, and especially our action. which is always focused on our organizational principles, which are extremely strong. So it's important to be here talking a little bit about our practices. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this experience here in Brazil, in the João Clementi Institute, which is located in São Paulo, in the municipality of São Paulo, which is the largest municipality in Brazil, and as far as inhabitants go. And so it's very representative. Lots of you already knew us here as the old APAI. We changed our brand because as APAI, we're only represented here in the municipality of São Paulo, and we wanted to take our practices, and including the practice of restorative justice, which is very important to us. We wanted to bring this to Brazil as a whole. So that's why we changed our brand. So I'd like to get a quick presentation. I think I can share my screen, I believe.
Just a moment, please. Can you see the presentation? Are you able to see the presentation? Okay, I'm going to start. As I told you, it's important to have this focus on disability. So I need to tell you this context. Our organizational principles are based on our belief, our purpose, aspirations, and values. I'm presenting a slide with a white background, written IJT on the upper right corner. And the first image is an eye, because we believe in the potential of the people with intellectual disability. And if we have the necessary support, this inclusion can be full. Our purpose is exactly to promote the autonomy and the inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities in the society, to contribute strongly in the advocacy and the guarantee of rights and the promotion and prevention of health. So here they have a picture of a flag on the floor, because this is our purpose. As an aspiration, we have the image of a brain. We want to be participating as a leader, a leading institution in the cause of the intellectual disability in Brazil. We want to expand our actions to the national level and even international. And the last picture we see here is about our values: ethics, transparency, respect to differences, of course, constant innovation and improvement, a collaborative attitude, and the valuing of people. This is what guides our work. The next slide, we can see 4 rectangles that show our main strategic axis of work. It is exactly what the organization aims to work on. So people think that we only work in the health area because we were pioneers in the baby foot test, or in the educational area because we worked in this area in the past. And we have 4 main pillars. The first one is promotion and prevention of health. So we started this test for babies, newborn babies in Brazil, the foot test. It's a way for us to prevent or to localize some diseases, some problems that people can have. So this test can find more than 50 diseases. And we have this constant struggle to increase this. Also, we work in diagnosis of the intellectual disability. People with disabilities, they are all also getting older, and see this appearance.
We closed down our schools. We had regular schools here, and then we started working on the perspective of inclusive education. So now we work with regular schools and we work with specialized educational support, and we support these people seeking to break inherent barriers, both the family and teachers as well. We have some professional inclusion services as well, because throughout life, these people need to create opportunities because we are working with independence, autonomy, and they're only going to be able to do this if they're working effectively and creating their own income. So we have a lot of people who have been included in the labor market. We use the methodology of supporting work. So we don't need to necessarily train people to include them, but we can do both of them together. And we have over 98% of these people kept in the labor market, and they keep on acting for many years. Turnover is very low, and that's very gratifying for us. And this is the theme of our seminar. We have a whole area for defense and guarantee of rights based on the UN Human Rights Convention, the inclusion law that we have in Brazil, which is a very important axis of our work. We have a lot of different services inside here that focuses on this area of guaranteeing rights. We have an advocacy area for the construction of public policies. We have an public or private defenders here in our structure, which is very important, so that they have a voice and can participate in this context together with the institution. We have a social legal program for violence prevention, and we have a technical support center for the first police station for people with disability in the city of São Paulo. And we also have a whole area for science and innovation, which we believe that only with science and data and sharing information can we change society and create effective public policies. So we have a teaching and research center with national and international partnerships.
Now, quickly, some figures of Joe Clementi Institute. We assist over 20,000 people in 2020. Even with the pandemic, we never stopped our work. Of all the axes that I showed you. So we didn't stop with any of these axes. We continued our assistance online with telemedicine. We kept the work functioning, our laboratory as well. So this was the impact that we brought to society. We have almost 430 workers, 304 volunteers, and most importantly, we aim to decentralize our service to be closer to the society. We work in São Paulo, but also we have other 8 decentralized centers in the municipality of São Paulo and outside the municipality of São Paulo. we have in the region of Registro with a center of employability, and we are expanding to other regions. So we have to keep this concept of being close to people. And of course, I have to mention the importance of the work of this topic of the people with intellectual disability. We have 45 million people with disabilities in general in Brazil. You can see here the map of Brazil, and next to the map we have a graph showing these figures. So we have 45 million people with disabilities in Brazil. 24% of the population has some kind of deficiency, some kind of disability. Here we can see the different disabilities that we have in Brazil. Of course, these are figures from 2010. We are late regarding this update of these figures, but this is the latest official data that Brazil has, which shows the importance of having data and information. So first of all, we have the visual disability, then the motor disability, listening disability, and lastly, the intellectual or mental disability. In this context, I'm going to interrupt the presentation of slides for a moment. So it is very important in our discussion. And I would like to tell you a little bit of our experience in the Institute Clementi. Since 2018, we started the Center of Support in the Police Department of Disabilities. So it was our first experience giving assistance to all people with all kinds of disabilities. So we worked with the Secretariat of the Rights of the Persons with Disabilities. So in Brazil, we have many partnerships with the institutions. We have the support of a specialized technical team. You're going to get to know them in a little while. Some of them are here with us. They will present to you with detail the work that we have performed. And to guarantee a very broad accessibility in all the assistance of the persons with disabilities. Our team is formed by a multidisciplinary group of people. We have interpreters of Brazilian Sign Language, psychologists, social assistants, and other people in the support teams that ensure there's accessible assistance, there's quality assistance. As I told you, we do our best to disseminate our practices, our initiatives, and new projects in order to innovate and improve our work, especially in the field of the advocacy and the guarantee of the rights of the persons with disabilities. This is our main premise. It's important to highlight that our paths are crossed. This is a small area, so we get to meet very interesting people doing our work. And we had the great opportunity to define this topic of restorative justice with important professionals. And we've had great partners like Dr. Katia and people who have supported us in our organization. It's very important to us. Specifically talking about restorative justice, in November 20th, so it's November 20th, 2020, 1 year ago almost, with the support of Dr. Katia and also Sabrina and Dr. Carla Boin, who is also a consultant in this area of restorative justice for us. We started a pilot project. It was very important for us to be able to incorporate in our practices of restorative justice the dialogue with people with disabilities and their families. So it's really key for the families to be following up the processes. And exactly the people who would come to us for our service and our support in the police station, as where it is a space to report situations of violence and violation of rights. With all the support of the technical team that it introduced to you, and also the facilitators, Dr. Kate, Dr. Carla, and Sabrina, we could identify and select within the cases, the violence cases that we assisted in the police station, an occurrence record, having a sample for us to apply the practices of restorative justice with a new model, with this new look, with this new perspective, as Professor Howard mentioned, having this new look to the conflicts, looking at the conflicts from a different perspective. This experience has been really interesting, very enriching for us. We've had a lot of learning along with the technical team in all this process, so we can contribute for the development of initiatives of restorative justice involving people with disabilities. So it's a pioneer project. So throughout this year, we started the work along with the families, how all this work happened. And I would like to highlight to you the work of Joe Clementi Institute has with people with disabilities. So we focus a lot on this, the importance to understand the human diversity in everything we do. So what we are doing here reinforces this. And with restorative justice, it is the same thing. It is an important moment for that. The active listening is very important in our processes, in our restorative justice processes, as well as the possibility to express feelings and perceptions in this dialogue, always having a unique look to each person. This kind of look, a look with this quality, is really, really fundamental. So just would like, I just wanted to show you a little bit of our work, of our institution, the importance of restorative justice in our work. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you to talk about this partnership that we are having as an institution with different organizations present in this event. Thank you so much, and I'm available for any comment or question.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Machado. I've made so many notes, and I deeply appreciate your journey from the medical profession, from a healthcare medical framework, which quite often is the frame that excludes people with disabilities and doesn't necessarily focus on the values they bring to our society. So having that academic background and then bringing that into those strong disciplines of legal and educational aspects, as you just mentioned, your work is multidisciplinary. And I would like to suggest that we're now pushed to make it transdisciplinary. This type of cross-discipline knowledge really pushes us to reevaluate restorative justice practices and principles. Your knowledge and the additional backing with data, that is so powerful, because often it's the data that's not available to really have a deeper understanding of people with disabilities. So using your research methodologies and the wisdom with Joe Clementi Institute, the data you bring of that transdisciplinary work is just inspiring. And I'm seeing there's lots of discussion in the chat already, lots of people exchanging emails. So there's already a sense that your work is foundational. Thank you both for your contributions to kicking off our second day of this seminar. So now we're going to move into the next stage of the seminar, where we'll have a panel focused on restorative justice for persons with disabilities. I'll be facilitating this 2-hour discussion where we're talking about restorative justice and the unique perspectives from your respective universities or organizations. Topics will include how we promote restorative justice as a lens to dismantling inequalities that people with disabilities continue to face from various systems, including medical, legal, healthcare, educational, just to name a few. So how can we and our panel members really draw some of the wisdom and work that we've heard earlier this morning into the next level of restorative justice? Before we actually dive in, I forgot I didn't identify myself. So thank you for reminding us about describing ourselves. I'm a male wearing a blue shirt with a polka dotted tie. In my background, I have a stone fireplace. And I would encourage our panelists to also please identify yourselves and provide a description of yourselves, and then we will be able to move into our program. I want to start with our first group of 4 panelists. I recognize Daniella Varias, who is a psychologist at Joe Clementi Institute. Our second panelist in this group will be Carla Boyd, who is an adjunct professor at the Federal University of Sao Paulo, a mediator and consultant for restorative justice. Kellen De Jesus, psychologist at Joe Clementi Institute. Take it away, Daniella.
Good morning. I am a white woman. I'm wearing glasses. My hair is a little bit longer than my shoulders, and I have a shirt with many colors. Behind me, there's a white wall. I'm going to share with you a presentation that we made. So that we can organize our speeches. Daniella, can you speak a little bit louder? I'm going to try and do that. In this first slide, we have this background. We have the logo of the Joe Clementi Institute, which used to be called the APAI of Sao Paulo. This is the colors of our institute, which is pink, purple, orange. And this is the presentation of our, the title of our seminar, Restorative Justice and People with Disabilities. Here we have the Technical Support Center for the first DPPD of Sao Paulo, the first police precinct for people with disabilities. So before we start speaking specifically about the cases using the methodology of restorative justice, I'd like to talk about the creation of this police precinct. I know that Daniela mentioned this, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper about this police precinct in Sao Paulo. First, in the state level, we had a section we have a law specifically for that deals with violence against people with disabilities. So we had people from public security, social services, and justice trying to ensure the rights of people with disabilities. And we had a program that we needed to think about actions to foster the fight against violence against people with disabilities. Then after we created this state program, we had a decree that created the first police precinct for people with disability in Sao Paulo. It's Decree 60028 from 23rd of January 2014. So with this program, together with this police precinct, it comes as a recognition that people with disabilities are more likely to suffer violence. And we know that there's a variety of barriers for access to public services. And then thinking about these walls, these barriers, we have a multidisciplinary team to help people through to eliminate these barriers and have a space where they can make an accusation, where they can report any violence. And then so we have social assistants, we have psychologists, social researchers to have data so that we understand who's coming into the precinct, who's not. What do we do with these numbers? How do we foster good public policies? So we need to research so that people aren't continually being subjected to violence. We also have some administrative. Is this a little better? Because my voice is a little low. I'm trying to speak very close to the microphone. So beyond this multidisciplinary team, we also have a police team because the whole, we have the police chief and also a few other members of the precinct. Like Daniela said, the creation of the police precinct came from 2014. But our organization took on the management of this police precinct in December 2018. And we have a few goals. The support center has 3 specific objectives, which is to carry out, well, we have specific objectives, which is to carry out in-person support or remote support with technology resources, especially in the case of deaf people. Oftentimes we have interpreters, or we might be called by another precinct in Sao Paulo, because often they don't have this kind of team with interpreters or other multidisciplinary members. We also have training for professionals in the public service network throughout the year. We invite many people from the network of human rights defense, which includes public security, people from the justice sector, from the education and health sector, so that we can train these professionals, always thinking about violence against people with disability, how to avoid that. We also have the mission of collecting, consolidating, and monitoring data in relation to violence against people with disabilities. Having said that, how is it that people with disability can access our service? How can they access the precinct? This happens with spontaneous spontaneous visits. So they can come in and they can make a report. They can get some help from the multidisciplinary team. Sometimes we also have the Network for Defense and Guarantee of Rights. This network is made up of people from public security, education, the legal sector. Any one of these can forward anyone here to the police precinct. And we can also get the anonymous reports via our hotline. It's a national level hotline to report violence against disabled people. It can be the person that's suffering the violence that reports, or it can be just someone who witnessed a situation of violence. And then you do this report, and we receive reports that have to do with people with disabilities. Whenever the hotline receives a case here in Sao Paulo that has to do with people with disability, they send it to us so that we can send in the multidisciplinary and police teams. And we can send in, let's say, if there's someone deaf, we can send in the interpreter to see whether this report is true and to see what kind of action should be taken for technical support or support to the person that suffered violence. So how is it that restorative justice come into us? What kind of cases can we work with restorative justice? How do we use this other methodology, this other point of view, this other lens for cases that we already had here? So I'm going to present the first case. So this was an anonymous report. We don't know who made the report. And the demand was that there was salaries being kept by employers in relation to 3 adults with intellectual disabilities. So this was being done by a few family members. We needed to understand who are the people involved in this case. So there were 3 adults with intellectual disabilities. The oldest was 30 years old. The other one was 27 years old. And the other one was 26-year-old. And they have a sister, a mother, and an aunt. And in the report, this aunt was the person that was keeping their salaries. So in this family context, we had 3 men with intellectual disabilities. They live with their sister. The sister has 2 children. The mother of these men lives with her partner in another place, but she goes to the son's houses every day to help with domestic tasks. And the aunt lives in another house with her partner and her daughters. But she supported these young men sometimes, like, for instance, support them in inserting themselves into the labor market and with financial issues. So when this case reached us, all these people are called to give their versions. And so we had to tell them to give them back their financial rights, their credit cards, and so on and so forth, so they can use them as they like. They can manage their own salaries. They can be supported, of course, but they have the right to manage their own salaries. So everyone came into the support center. The aunt gave them the credit cards. We talked to everyone individually, and we thought that at this stage, in this case, it would be an interesting case to work with restorative practices, thinking about that it's a family living together. The aunt also supports the nephews, and there's a bond in this family. Carla is going to talk a little bit to us about how this case actually reaches restorative justice. Just 1 second. Carla, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Carla. I am a white woman. I have brown hair, shoulder length, brown eyes. I'm using red glasses. I'm using a green t-shirt. I'm in a room that has a bookshelf behind me. And besides me, I have some orchids. They're purple orchids. It's a huge pleasure to be here today and to participate in this event with these people who I deeply admire. And I'm going to begin by speaking a little bit about how we've been building this together, because I like to bring the name of my partners as facilitator in this work. Her name is Mari Nascimento. She's my partner in this work. And when we started, well, we have 2 steps in this work that we do together with the Clementi Institute based on restorative justice. First, we organize and think about, we have introductory talks about restorative justice, and so that we could learn. So we've been building this together from the very start, together with Sabrina, Lolly, and we have Dr. Katya also introducing us to this topic, so that we can change the language we use, so that we can understand what languages are inserted inside the context of the Clementi Institute, and to speak about the logic that really is the basis for our work, the principles that are the basis for our actions. So this moment was very rich in learning for the organization. We had facilitation courses so that we could train facilitators inside the context of the Clementi Institute, which will then continue this work. And we also had a proposal to go through awareness raising, and so that we can switch to this language to restorative justice and bring it to the context of our institute, the context which Daniella Machado Mendes has mentioned, Daniella Farias has already mentioned. I'm just going to call you Dani because you're my friend. I'm not going to call you Daniela, okay? I'll call you Dani. And so they've already told us a lot. And I didn't know about this work before we started. So I didn't know that in the precinct, there was the possibility to have such a careful look about these issues in the context of persons with disability. So how do we get this case coming into restorative justice? Well, at this moment, I'm a partner with Mari Nascimento. She's the other facilitator that works with me, and we started talking. What's going to be necessary so that we work with restorative justice in this case? And the first thing was, let's talk to Daniella Farias and Kelly. She's going to speak right after me. So we have 4 people working together, building these circles, these conversation circles. And like Professor Howard Zer said, restorative justice is not just a practice. It's not just a conversation circle. So our point of view is not just about how we're building these practices. So Mari and me talked to Kellen and Dunny about how we're going to do this. So we have a script to invite people into the circles, to include people into our circles, and therefore that's how we started. It's also important to highlight that the context in which we start this work is in the pandemic. And it's a context in which we're doing this work virtually. So we also have this challenge ahead of us of communication, of integration. We have to deal with this whole context. So we've been having these meetings online. And we've also been taking into consideration the reality of the people who are going to be in the circle. So when we first started, the question that we first had was, do these people have a computer at home? Do you have an internet connection? Do they have the skill set to install this platform, to participate in a Zoom meeting? What are the obstacles that may exist that we may have to deal with in this proposal? And we saw that it wasn't possible, so let's do it through WhatsApp. So we're doing video calls on WhatsApp. So you can think of a home where 3 young men with intellectual disabilities live. They're 3 brothers. They live with their sister, who is not diagnosed as intellectually disabled, and she has 2 small children. This home, throughout the story, had been managed by this aunt who helped these young men in doing these domestic tasks and so on. So we have the context of the aunt, and we also have the mother. She doesn't live with them. She's also intellectually disabled, but she's always there helping her children. So we set up these conversations and we started working with them. At first, since we had this anonymous report, we were looking specifically at the issue that the aunt had their credit cards, and it was the one with their money. And this was something that was easily solved, but then we saw that there was a whole dynamic that was built on the family based about the way that they live together as a family, which is a whole very complex issues with lots of different conflicts inside this structure. And from the point of view of restorative justice, which has as a principle, which Professor Hauser has already mentioned, and which is also something that's always brought up by Professor João Salme, are the issues of multidimensionality of humans and the relational nature of humans. So for me, it's been very pleasurable to work with restorative justice with people with disabilities, having this perception of how much we have so many dimensions, so many personal dimensions, and the issue of disabilities, which has been something that I've really been thinking about so much since then. I've been thinking about all the disabilities I also have, how many disabilities I carry, and how much this focus that we should have on restorative justice, which is the strengthening of the community, the strengthening of an environment of trust so that people have another perspective, this relational perspective, not an individual perspective. So how can we foster inclusion as much as possible so that their speech is included in a wide sense, the words that they have to share? So in the beginning, we carried out some conversations with one of the young men about the context of the house they lived in, and we could realize that what he had to say was compromised. He was very shy. He didn't want to speak a lot because there were a lot of different people around him in his context, in the room he was in. So we realized that there was a reality that they've been vaccinated, and so there was an enhancement of their situation in the pandemic. So we thought, let's build up the possibility of receiving him at the João Clementi Institute so that we can support him and we can talk up to each person individually. Why? Because we want to build trust with everyone so we can reach the circle, the conversation circle. So we talk to each one of them individually with the support of Danny and Kellen, so that, well, in the João Clementi Institute, we use the Zoom platform. And we wanted to build an environment where they could feel safe to talk. And it was an amazing experience. It was an amazing experience because we talked. I think it's important to highlight that before we organized these meetings, all four of us built the script, and we had a conversation. We had the conversation with our clients, and then we all talked together about what the next step would be. How do we develop this next step? And so during this moment, when we're doing these pre-circles with them, we asked them to come in, and the mother came in with them to the Institute. We had separate encounters. We saw that they liked the conversation and that the conversation came to a certain level. And this has been really valuable, which is to talk about what you like to eat, what the most fun that they had, what did they like to do. So in this sense, you can see that we have this environment of trust being built up, and this gives us better and better conditions for them to speak and to be open with us until we get to a moment when we need to finish up, because actually what we wanted to do was to keep on going because it was a very cool, very chill environment. So this perception of first doing it at the home, then sending it to the Institute, and having all of the scare, and through this scare we can see the changes and the breakage of some dynamics inside the family. Who are the caretakers? Who is being cared for? Now we have the point of view of the people who are being cared for, so that we can see this notion of care from the perspective of looking at the person with disabilities based on a feeling that you have special care. This is a kind of relation that you establish, and we have care and attention to the needs that might come up in each person's situation on another perspective, because everyone who is involved in a conversation circle will have their different needs and will be able to speak about their needs. And so to close up my speech, and then I'll go open the floor to Kellen, and then I will give some final considerations about this case. Well, this perspective about what are the kinds of care that we must have for the preparation of a circle due to these differences that we identify in relation to the people who are going to participate and what we need to do in order to really support these people so that they are very comfortable, so that they are feeling well at the time of the circle. So we don't have this thing which Howard Zer really emphasized in the beginning, which I think is a really big issue in restorative justice, which is to think that we're doing a great work with a circle without having certain caution, certain care. And then this work is not going to be restorative. It can even damage people, even with the best of intentions. So important for us to evaluate what needs to be done. And we need to have a conversation, which I'm from the mediation. So I call this a mediation, but it's a so we have specific mediations to prepare so that later we can come back to the circle. Always coming from a very basic part of restorative justice, which is the principle of not knowing. That means I, as facilitator, don't have knowledge about what's best for everyone involved. Me, as a mediator, I don't tell people how they should act, how should they conduct themselves, what is best for them. However, I will aid them in this environment of trust that we build together by sitting down and talking about what we like to eat, for instance, so that we can build this trust, so that they themselves, in the context that they have in the family that they've organized, so that they themselves can identify what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And, you know, taking care about our value judgments, because oftentimes we start diagnosing people, and this can be an issue that brings problems. So, Thomas, now I'd open the floor so that you can present Kellen. We didn't present her, and then she's going to speak after me, and then I'll come in and close after Kellen.
Great. Thank you so much. There was a lot of important discussion there, talking about your cross partnership and the efforts that all of you are undertaking. Thank you so much for your contributions to this panel. Next, I would like to introduce the next three panelists. Erica Race from the Joe Clementi Institute, Maria Mello, also from IJC, and Sabrina Paroli, an educational consultant for IJC as well. Take it away.
Hello, good morning. Can you all listen to me? Everyone, ladies, gentlemen, people from all genders, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are live, but I know that some people will have access to this information in a later moment, according to their own time. My name is Kellen. I'm a Black woman. I have short curly hair. And I'm wearing a blue coat. I work at the Joe Clementi Institute. I'm going to talk a little bit about the specificities of disabilities. And then after me, Erica will speak. Actually, Erica will help me with the slides. Her support will be really important. Well, following the words of everyone who spoke before me, I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to share what we as a team have built, considering the multidisciplinary assistance that we all offer to the people with disabilities. I will go back to the presentation to say that according to the law, we consider a person with disability someone who has a long-term impairment of physical, mental, intellectual, and sensorial nature. Someone whose interaction with one or has one or more barriers that can obstruct the participation, their full participation in society with equal conditions compared to the other people. So I'm presenting this slide with a white background with the logo of the institute. Why are we talking about intellectual disability itself? There are different specificities, but it's important to remember that we need to do the exercise of understanding the disability as a need, as a characteristic of any person. And the specificity, the singularities of the disabilities can be presented. When we talk about this topic with the restorative justice team, the idea was to look at the specificities, and we as a team can contemplate the singularity of that person. For this, it's important to go back a little bit and remember what is intellectual disability, what is specific about this person, so we can determine the possible barriers and promote an accessible assistance. Intellectual disability is characterized by relevant limitations in the functioning of intellectual and adaptive behavior. Intellectual disability has to do with thinking of the abilities, such as memory, for example, and how it impacts the decision-making of these people and their participation that they develop in the world and how they relate to other people. The adaptative behavior has to do with the social behavior and other practices, such as taking a shower or eating, what we're going to wear, what we're going to read, what social network we're going to see on the internet, what type of study I'm going to participate, what is my academic background. All these difficulties, they are inherent of any person, not only the people with intellectual disability, but some of these people, they may have the need for a better care or the potentialization of the care. And thinking of this, we started building our meetings. Intellectual disability has a multifactorial cause, and it happens before 18 years old. Diagnosis has to be multidisciplinary. The intellectual functioning has to do with the general mental functioning and also learning, reasoning. And adaptative behavior has to do with communication, self-care, life in the house, health and security, academic functions, and also work. Here in this slide, it is a white slide with the image of a human figure showing the picture of a brain. Intellectual disability, it happens between 0 and 18 years old. It has a multifactorial cause. It has a multidisciplinary diagnosis. There are depths in the cognitive functions, adaptive functions, in the conceptual domain, social and practical domain. Why are we saying that repeatedly? Because when we think of all this, and when we know all this, guides our meetings and the way that we developed the meetings. Also, I'm bringing to you about this specific disability, intellectual disability. And I'm bringing you the first case, which is what was a person with autism. The autists, they have repetitive and restricted behavior. They have social communication compromised, which means the socialization and the verbal and nonverbal communication. We know there are different types of autism with multifactorial causes, having a multidisciplinary diagnosis, which is the same thing as the intellectual disability. The severity will be determined, assessed according to the supports that will be necessary. It's not according to what the person cannot do, but it is according to the supports that are necessary, as much as the environment has to become accessible and offer support to this person. Who are the persons with disabilities? As Estella mentioned yesterday, we need to think of the people with disabilities and also the people who are part of minorities. We need to think that these people, they are entitled to rights. They are subjects. They are able to make decisions. They need to have autonomy. If it's not present, it should be motivated. They have self-management capacity. They have a capacity of self-defending and the capacity of independence. So we're talking about a unique being, human being, a singular human being that needs to have his or her singularity respected and assured. Whatever, in whatever part of the treatment. We do it in our everyday practice, and we guide other people who want to assist people with disabilities for them to have another perspective, another look to these people. Now, this question here was the question that guided us. We created hypotheses, and after that, our paths. Me and Dani and Mari, she's not here today, but she was present in all the moments of the dialogues. And we thought, what kind of support that we can offer? Thinking of the premises of restorative justice, it could be a safe place for the youngsters to talk about themselves, talk about their choices and preferences, talk about their desires. And then we think of valuing and motivating them. And coming from this premise of not knowing, not judging, but actually dealing with what presented to us in a way that they could also find their own pathways, the ways to lead them for autonomy and the possibility to make decisions as any other person. And thinking of this human being who is unique, who has some fragilities, but is a person that is entitled to rights, that has autonomy, self-management. And who are these people? This idea guided us, and we thought of ways to guarantee an accessible assistance, to think of creating a verbal and non-verbal language that could contemplate the specificities and singularities of the people that could be there for us. So this intention permeated our dialogues. It was a guide for, it was not a north, I would say it was a south for our dialogues. In our cultural, social context, in the context of Brazil, that needs to be considered, assessed, to think of the practice of restorative justice, to contemplate the characteristics of the south of the world, remembering the dictionary of Paulo Freire. And what are the specificities that we contemplated in this assistance, in this service? It is not extended to the other services that can happen. The importance is to look at the singularity of that human being in front of us, and the group, the team, the facilitators, they can think of conditions that are individualized, customized, although it is important for the community, for the collective to be strengthened, but the individual is in this collective. So to strengthen the collective, we also need to strengthen the subjects, the individuals. So we pay attention to these things. A reserved environment. We talked about the respecting the response time of these people, which might not be the same, the normal time of response. So this assistance takes longer. So we keep talking about asking simple, direct, and calm questions. We also talked about the idea and the stigma related to the story of the person that has intellectual disabilities, because people think they have like fantasy stories. Do not treat adults or young adults as children. They are not kids, they are youngsters. So I need to look at this person as this person is presenting to me, and what it is like, how the person presents him or herself. What is the look that I give to a person with disability? So I'm going to leave this reflection to you. Not only listen or believe the personal assistance. So it was important, it has been important to be listening to the people. So all the meetings that we had a big meeting in November this month. So we are on our path and improving the work that we do. And also we should confirm the details of the demand. Why that? Because sometimes the family member talks about the demand, but the need of that person with disabilities is a different one. In that specific case, we're talking about 3 people, 3 youngsters, 3 young adults who have intellectual disability that have in their lives part of their independence preserved. They go out, they work, they have financial resources, they have socialization, but they still lacked the opportunity to manage their own money, their own financial resources. And it has to do directly with the decision-making and how they relate to the world. It's like, can I buy a piece of clothing? No, you can't. So I'm going to a party. So what clothes am I going to wear? To ask this question and to know the answer, I need to know how much autonomy I have to manage my financial resources, as well as my whole life. So I'm going to wrap up here. I'm going to hand the floor to Carla. She will provide some considerations, reflections that will complement what I brought to you. The experience has been really fantastic, very enriching experience. I know we know a tool and a work strategy that involves restorative justice, and there's no doubt that it's really enriching to our work. So I thank you so much to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, people from all genders who listen to my brief information and explanations. Thank you so much. Well, excellent. And this is it. It's about dancing together, as we say. It enables this support to each step that we take. This understanding, Kelly, that you bring of what are the necessary supports for the people to have autonomy. Look at the people who have this diagnosis of intellectual disability, but not focusing on the disability, but focusing on the needs of the person and their qualities. And we keep thinking, how restorative justice can offer the support, how we offer this support. And it's interesting to highlight that there is not such thing as all people with disabilities are equal, like a block. So they are unique persons. So we have about 100 people in this case. 4 of them were diagnosed as people with disabilities, and each of these people have their own individual traits, their way of being. And we could identify, even among the 3 young men, that in the first moment they lost autonomy because they had no access to their bank card or to the salary that they received. And now, from the conversations that we had in this meeting, that it was really meaningful, and they told us that they are enjoying this possibility to buy things, and the food is different, so they now can choose what they're going to eat. They like cookies, for example, chocolate cookies, or one of them went to the supermarket to buy something, to buy this cookie with a friend in the break time of work. So this autonomy that is built gradually and in the first moment doesn't seem to be important, it has a huge potency and importance in the structuring for that person to feel as a subject that is entitled to rights. And Stella's talk yesterday, we know there are different steps, and I'm learning a lot. I have been learning a lot, and I need to learn more to continue this work. And also I learned with Danny, with Kellen and Madi, in each talk that we have, and also with the people involved. In the case of the 6, not 100, 6 participants in this project, with a person that maybe used the bank card of the boys. This person is the same one that will provide support to their jobs. So everything is very complex, and it's beautiful because of this. And it's part of restorative justice, this multi-dimensionality. The person is not only one thing or another thing. And it is about not knowing and not judging. In every moment, we need to keep reaffirming in this work, because it's quite easy for us when we have a situation and we have a ready look of how things have to be. So we keep re-evaluating that. We need to forget about our previous knowledges and to be in this movement with the people, building this step by step. So we are in this moment of this case that all these people already participated in the pre-circle, and we are taking care of something that we need to work on. And then we will be all together again in a circle, thinking that these persons, they will have each of them their own room with somebody to provide support to them in their talk, to participate in the circle. So we are already thinking of the supports that we can, in a creative way, and it's really, really exciting, the creativity. So how can we do using our creativity to provide this support to establish this meeting that we're going to carry out? But we are already collecting some good outcomes of this process, which is a differential of these works. We don't have a specific end to reach. We are in the process, we are in the path, and it has been very enriching already. Now, Thomas, I will go back to you so you can continue in the second case. And thank you very much to you all for listening to us.
Thank you,
Thank-
Carla. Go ahead, Ellen.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. You gave us so much to think about and so much potential research questions from these presentations. I think it's very helpful for us to be organizing the next event and seminar. Thanks for your valuable time and your contribution to people with disabilities. Now, the next group of panelists I would like to introduce and recognize are Erica Amaral from the IJC, who is a social worker, Maria Mello, who is also a social worker at IJC. And here with them also is Sabrina Paoli, who's an educational consultant for restorative justice and restorative practices. Very excited to listen to what you have to say, and let's start with Erica.
Good morning, everyone. Like Thomas said, my name is Erica Amaral. I'm going to do a self-description. I'm a Black woman with a dark brown hair and dark brown eyes and curly hair. I'm around 30 years old and I'm using a white t-shirt and I have a white wall behind me. I am a social assistant at the Technical Support Center here at the First People with Disability Police Precinct. So I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity for being here and to add a little bit to the contributions that everyone's already made. And now we're going to take a look at case 2. I'm going to get some help for the screen sharing. Okay, so here we have case 2. How did this case reach the precinct? The first demand was a dispute for the guardianship of a person by parents. So we have one young adult man with autism, 2 sisters, a mother and a father. We ended up putting 5 younger brothers in the slide, but it's 3 younger brothers. And there's also the current partners of the mother and father of this young man with autism. So for us, it's important to talk about the complexities and particularities that this case presents to us. And so to do this, I have some social markers, which is a term that comes from sociology. This is something that we use to foster data and research. As we've been saying a lot, we always research based on data to understand the social aspects of a given population. And so here we have this slide. We have social markers on top, and then we have these 6 items that I'm going to talk about very briefly. More specifically in social services, when we don't often talk about social marketers. We talk about vulnerabilities and social aspects. We talk about gender identity and sexual orientation, territoriality, disabilities, ethnicities, which include race and color, socioeconomic aspects, and gender. So this data will give the characteristic of a certain population. This is very important for us to understand the complexities that are involved in a given population that they might face and that they might experience violence in a greater or lesser degree, depending on where they are in relation to these markers. And I think we've had a criticism in relation to this. A lot of these markers that we use in research, they don't mention disabled people, which makes it hard to create knowledge about this area, to understand how these people are living today. As Daniella mentioned, We only have data from 2010 from the IBGE. And so, as Danny already mentioned earlier on, we're seeking to collect data in the precinct to foster research that might be carried out based on this information, thus generating the possibility of making better public policies and also affirmative action for certain populations. So continuing the gender and sexual orientation identity will give us some information about this population. So we know that people, when they identify their gender and sexual orientation, they can suffer a lot of violence. They can be susceptible to specific kinds of violence when they declare their gender identity, sexual orientation. Territoriality, what is that? This is where people are located. In what part of the city? Is it a more central part? Is it in more marginalized peripheral areas that are farther from the center in Sao Paulo? Why is this important? This is very much connected to the services they have access to. So the farther away from the city center, oftentimes they don't have social services, and health services. They might be scarce, and access to these services might be blocked or might be hard. So we also think about what is their living condition like? Is their locomotion okay between their region and the central parts of the city? Maybe the places where they work. Thinking about the locomotion, the movement of this person. What's their support network inside their territories? Is it their family? Is it the community? What are the services they have access to? So all of this can be observed inside this issue of territoriality. Another social marker what I put in here is disabilities. So persons with disabilities, as has already been explained, they have certain particularities. They need support specifically for each person so that they have conditions of equity inside society, as our inclusion law really says we should. So this is an important marker so we can understand how this person is being seen inside their territory and what are the violences they can be subjected to in case we don't collect this data and we don't think about policies based on this. Ethnicity, race, and color is a one more factor which can bring in more violence to the lives of these people. We have structural racism, individual racism. So that's another way in which we can understand what might happen to a specific population. We have gender issues. So we have the roles of what each gender are socially defined as being feminine or masculine. So all of this gives us more information. Another marker, which I didn't put here, is the education level, which is also very connected to the kind of information they have access to. So depending on the level of education they have, they might have more access to education. And then specifically talking about people with disability, they will know more about their disability, more about their rights, more about what kind of access they might be able to have, and also have socioeconomic aspects. And we will see whether people are inserted into formal or informal work. Do they receive any kind of social benefits? And also experience different kinds of violence, like the criminalization of poverty that we see. So these social markers are a guiding light for us. Who is this person ahead of us? Who is this person that we're supporting? What are the violences that might be connected to their history? Depending on their territories, depending on their origins, depending on their skin color. All of this can support us in relation to what are the information that these people need to access in order to guarantee their rights and even to live in their own histories, their own social contexts. Finally, as I've already mentioned, they're a parameter that's to be used for decision making and making public policies and projects to help people with the needs that people have in certain specific social contexts. So let's go back to the slide, specifically about our case. So you will see, as I mentioned, how it's possible inside a case to look at these markers. So it's a young man. He's 22 years old. He has autism. He's a Black man. For a long time, he lived in squats in the central region of Sao Paulo, which for many years has been a region with extreme vulnerability and scarcity for people, for services. Inside his family, there was a lack of financial stability. Sometimes this was supported, they were supported by the mom, sometimes by the dad, in the informal or formal labor. So there were a lot of situations of domestic violence that were suffered by the mother, by the siblings, and by the victim himself, the young autist man. And so inside this context of conflict, the parents break up. And then after they break up, there's a variety of different situations that bring about specific difficult scenarios for this young man. So when he's a teenager, he has a hard time adapting to school, which is an issue that they always highlighted. The changes brought about by being a teenager and recognizing oneself as a young man with disabilities and being a part of a family that has to access a variety of different services. So they've been to the police precinct a lot of times with their demands. So they've already been supported by the previous team. And now as the new team, we also get in oftentimes. And now inside this whole context, the young man goes to live with his dad, has a hard time adapting. And the father uses psychoactive substances in an abusive manner. And so the father sometimes moves to another city in the coast and sometimes back to the state capital of Sao Paulo. And in a certain moment, in this case, this family is able to get a specific social benefit for this young man, which is the PPC. This is like a salary given to elderly people and young people with disabilities. So it's an income for this family. So what happens? A variety of different things happen to this young man. He starts having breakdowns due to conflicts in the situation, due to a lack of a place to live, due to instability, and in a certain moment, they come back to the precinct with certain demands, and one of them is the misuse of the benefit. And the father wants to be the guardian of his son because oftentimes this young man runs away from his father's house to try and live with his mother. So at the moment when the situation comes in here, we try to build a place where we can listen to the young man and to his parents. And so we always try to highlight the right to choose of this young man. He has to have the right to say what his desires are, with whom he wants to live. And so we talk to each person because guardianship doesn't make sense because this young man is already over 18 years old. He had the right to be respected. And at that moment, there's a breakage of the bond between the young man and the father when he understands that the son does not have the obligation to live with him. And so when we start using restorative justice, we always remember this case because we think about the strengthening that happened for this young man. And so he decided to continue relating to his father, but he just doesn't want to live with his father. So we see in the sense that there's a possibility of strengthening these relations. So inside the pre-circle activities, we thought a lot about this. We started to build a space so where this young man could speak. And so we respected his time to assimilate, to answer different aspects. We brought different questions in an objective manner. And we tried to avoid any kind of to try and avoid treating him as a child, as a fragile child. This can also end up happening. And we also try to respect what was said about the demands. Who is demanding what? What is this young man demanding? What are the different members of the family demanding? How is this separated? So this is very important to think about. So finally, I'd like to highlight that it's a very complex case. So there's a variety of different things crisscrossing each other. There's actually a variety of different stories passing this young man. And this is a part of the family nucleus. And so as a technical team, we're centering our point of view on the person with disability to try and guarantee their rights and their full participation in decision-making in relation to decisions that are a part of their lives. They're going to impact their lives. So that's always going to be the focus for us. So that's it. Thank you for listening to me. And now I pass the word to my colleague.
That's wonderful. Wonderful presentation. Thank you, Erica. Such important information that you shared. And let's continue this important dialogue with Maria Mello. Again, this is a really critical, important conversation. And I think that, Erica, your point really connect with a lot of the other things that other panelists have saying. So Maria, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, people of all genders. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, speaking to you, talking about the work that was developed between Restorative Justice and the Technical Support Center of the Precinct that relates to people with disabilities. As Erica mentioned, we worked on this case together, case 2. So I'm going to continue exactly from where she stopped. We have some aspects of this case, and also I want to bring a reflection on what we learned as we worked in this second case regarding ableism. When we think of the assistance to a young adult, an 18-year-old person, a Black person, important to bring all these social markers and this transversality of this case. Many things will come to mind. We have this pre-established image of what is a person with disabilities, especially when this person has an intellectual disability or psychosocial disability, or people with autism. One of the first questions that I remember that we had in this pathway that Kellen mentioned, just think yourself as someone who provides assistance to a person with disabilities, and this person is the focus of our assistance. We had the reflection on the conditions of these youngsters to be able to speak for themselves in the meetings, in the circles. And we start to think of these aspects of ableism. So I brought to you a little definition of what ableism is. It is a category that defines the way that people with disabilities are treated as incapable. So one, the society suggests that these people are unable to work, to go to school, to go to college, to love, to have relationships, to feel desire, to feel desired, to have sexual relationships, etc. When we presume that these people do not have the ability to do something, it is an ableist attitude. Also, I put a picture of Dr. Aniguer de Mello. She is the person who proposed this word in Brazil in 2011 in a convention that talked about the rights of the LGBTQA+ population. And then, again, the social markers that are brought from Erica. Dr. Guedes, she is a person with disability. She is deaf, and also she defines herself as a lesbian woman. So when she does this study of an idea of body normality or the presence of a body in a society, she will define this term, this word, as a way to define the discrimination against people with disabilities. And why is it so important to start from this point? When we talk about discrimination against race, we talk about racism. Against gender, for example, in the case of women, we talk about sexism. And against the LGBTQA+ community, it's homophobia. And when we talk about the prejudice against people with disabilities, we didn't have a word for that. We talked about discrimination and barriers, and Anaí defends that it's necessary to name this prejudice, this discrimination, this thought, as she describes very well, and other people in the academia also do it, gain more space. So in 2014, people already talked about anti-ableism. And now this term is very well known. So the adoption of this term, this word, was good. And it brings visibility for the population with disabilities and for the things that they live in their everyday life in terms of gains and losses, in terms of visibility and invisibility as well. And this is why I brought her, Anaí. You can see her picture here. Thinking of this case specifically, when we bring the case of this young man with autism, we go through several steps. First, he's a person with autism, but not all persons with autism are the same, are equal. Maybe a person with autism really doesn't have conditions to talk, but not really not talking, but actually communicating the way that we are used to see. We yesterday talked about video centrism and audio centrism, thinking specifically about this, about a society that is not ready to work with different types of communication, different ways to communicate. And it is understood today as ableism. It is not just a word that defines this discrimination. Along with this word, we see that there is a structure that is socially constructed that is ableist. And this ableist structure, when it is socially constructed, it is culturally constructed as well. So there is an ableist culture. And the fact that we are immersed in this society makes people to be ableist. And they do not feel like that. They don't understand they are being ableist. But ableism continues being a mechanism for control, segregation, and repression. We're talking about the population with disabilities for many years. And unfortunately, we cannot just say, oh, let's stop talking about that. People say it's just, a silly talk or it's not relevant, but we need to fight for the space of participation for these populations. And for this word, ableism, we need to think of disability as a whole, and not to look at the disabled person as just somebody who is not able to do things. Before being disabled, that person is a human being. So when we think of this person specifically, we understood who this person was. Besides the autism, this person had a history. His family went through different situations and they were immersed in different types of vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities needed to be looked at individually, and we talked about it yesterday as well. We are in a group, but we have to understand that there is a relation of power in this group. So we sit on a circle to talk, although we are still in the beginning of the work, but we sit on a circle where there is a person with disability. You cannot presume that it's just about sitting down and talking. So we need all the supports that Kellen mentioned. We need to look at this person as an individual, all the singularities of that person, and the specificities of his disability. We are going to work in a way to guarantee the communication and the respect to that person in a full way. Well, when we look at this person, this young man, we had all this information as a background. So we built with him his possibilities to understand, to participate, respecting his time to speak. And sometimes it's different from what we are used to see. So the responses are not immediate. It takes some time to listen to him, and it is also a learning process for us to look at that person and understand that person. People talk about to put ourselves in his shoes, but it's not possible. It is about looking at that person and define what is necessary for you to understand and to be understood by that person. Then we kept working with this person, thinking of all these aspects, and also with his family. He had this father who went away, and we understand that we need to show this father that his son is a mission for him, a life mission for him. So somebody told this to that person, that kid, that boy was a mission, life mission, but it's not true, actually. It is a ableist look. He is also able to take care of his own life. And back to the power relationship, the mother also didn't understand that the boy's father didn't have the right to be with the son. So the mother was ableist as well, because although she understood that the boy had a disability, he had the right to be wherever he wanted, and not where the family supposes where he should be. And the others should look and work where this person should be and build this together. So where should this young man be? He should be a leader of his own life, to speak for himself. So the parents are not the ones to decide where he should be. He has the right to decide it for himself. So these are some things that we try to respect in this construction. Of course, it's something new, and we think of assistance. It is a role that we will be building. Also, we believe that to start a path of eliminating this prejudice, this ableism from our talks, from our constructions, there are some points to be considered. The first one is that we have to get to know the person with a disability. We have to access contents that are written and spoken by them. These people are the leaders of their own stories. Another important point is to allow yourself to live with them. So meeting the other person is a way to demystify this vision that was built in our society, the image of the person with disabilities. When when there is this co-living with this person, you are open to listen to that person and get to know that person. I'm going to give an example. When we talk about people with disabilities and we are near them, instead of addressing that person, we address our talk to the person who is the personal assistant. It is an ableist attitude. So when we talk about getting to know the person, we need to look at the person without showing that there's something strange there. We should look at that person as someone who is part of the human society, as anyone else. Another point is to allow the people with disability to occupy the places in society that belongs to them. So we need to guarantee for these spaces to be accessible for people with disability. I'm talking about not only physical spaces, but also political, social, cultural spaces, spaces to talk in lectures, in classes. So we think that there should always be someone to speak for the person with a disability, and it's not true. It is an ableist view. So we need to guarantee in all spaces the representativeness for these people with disabilities, not only to talk, but to have an effective listening. So we see sign language interpreters doing the translation or audio description, which exactly I didn't do it, but all my slides, they have a white background with letters with different colors. But anyway, when we are concerned with these details, we are moving towards a society that will start breaking the look and the paradigms that are naturally ableist, because this is how we learned this power relationship. So ableism is a power relationship. If it's not seen like that, we can end it. So we just keep repeating and experiencing them, all this ableist talk. For example, if I say, I don't have arms for that, it is an ableist talk. Or we don't have legs to keep a word like that, it is also an ableist talk. Or when we say something like, everyone has some type of disability. No, people have difficulties. Disability is something different. And it's important to be aware of that and to respect the disabled people and the spaces they should occupy. When we see that we change our attitudes in regards to this, we start to move towards a society that will be a little less ableist and more inclusive. So in events, in congresses, all these spaces, they must have spaces for people with disabilities. We cannot talk for them. We talk as professionals, but we cannot talk for them. Also, I cannot refer to myself as someone with a disability when I don't have any. So it is a lack of respect to them. I'm going to give an example. The person says, I'm Black too, because my great-grandfather was Black. No, it is an appropriation of something that is not yours. Or when we say, I also have a disability, but it's more like a difficulty that you have and not a disability. So it is also an ableist attitude. For us to keep on reflecting upon this topic, I brought this slide for us to think when we are ableist. We are ableist when, one, we believe that the person with a disability is not able to, And then there are different things. When we believe this person is not able to do something, we are being ableist. We are having an ableist attitude. When we believe that they're not able to work as a professional, to learn or study, to keep social or loving interactions, many times a person has a partner, a husband, a wife, and this person starts talking to the wife or to the husband who does not have a disability, and it is an ableist attitude. And then people say, hey, you're married, so a person with a disability can get married. So these comments are very ableist. So we need to talk about that, to pay attention to our attitudes, and we see ourselves in a place that we have a difficulty to relate with the disabled people, and it's not that. Everybody has a, people say everybody has a disability. No, people have difficulties, but disabilities is something different. It is a characteristic of the population that have to do with different things. So we need to respect them. Also, it is ableism when we ignore the point of view of the person with disability, when we refer to the person that is assisting them, the personal assistant. So when we have the meetings with the circles in the restorative justice, we are aware of listening to the person. Because sometimes the family member that is with that person has an ableist capacity, building the narrative for that person, and they cannot do that. Also, when we super protect somebody who has a disability, or when we believe that they don't have sexuality, or they have a very excessive sexuality, these are all ableist looks. As professionals, we start looking at these attitudes and we try to change them. Not all ableist attitudes are like that, and we need to look at this. We need to look at this person with a disability as a human being, and the disability as a specificity of humans. And it requires a specific look, yes, but it doesn't diminish the person as a human being. That person is not his or her disability.
So thinking about this case, Erica already talked a lot about this. So we really wanted to deconstruct these paradigms that have been created around persons with disability and guarantee the protagonism of people with disabilities in all spaces that they have a right to, which is the same as all other people without disabilities. So it's not just speaking, you know, there's something that sometimes people say things like, oh, everyone has some kind of disability. No, that's not really. People might have difficulties. Of course, we have different abilities and different capacities. This is not exactly about disability. We must respect these people because this is a part of human diversity. So we were building this experience, and it's interesting to see the construction of this process. And I think that I'll finish up now, and I'll pass the floor to Sabrina. Hello.
Sabrina, before I turn it over to you, I want to say, Maria, thank you very much on the things you touched on about disability. I want to recognize and thank Maria for your contribution. Really, you touched on some important topics of the differing identities within an individual who is disabled, that intersectionality and complexity, that you're not just looking at them as disabled, but the many identities that they bring, including ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, and preference. These are the complexities that our individuals are working with, and I appreciate your emphasis on that identity formation, and that the people with disabilities have their own being just like anyone else, and they are a part of human diversity, and celebrating those individuals of difference. But unfortunately, our system dictates specific stigmatized and marginalized individuals, and that's when harm is done, and bringing that to the center of conversation. So thank you, Maria, for that contribution. Now, Sabrina, take it away.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'd like to, well, first I'm going to describe myself. I am 38 years old. I am a white woman. I am dressed in a green dress and a black coat. I have long hair below the shoulders. I have light brown eyes. And I'm in a room. In the background, there's a bookshelf with some books. And I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity of being here. I think I've described myself, and I want to describe how I feel being here. So I feel very honored for all of this process. It's a process that is ongoing and that's going to keep on happening. It's a process of understanding, development, construction. And I had the opportunity to be with João Salmi, Katia, Carla, Stella, Daisy, Thomas, Jamie, learning so much about how to build up a space like this in order to bring about understanding. The beginning of an understanding of two themes, two sites, two places that are very important to be understood. And I'd also like to honor the entire process and all of the people who have been engaged so that we've been able to reach this situation, so that we've been able to be here talking to you about these cases which are also being understood through this process. So once again, I'd like to thank Katia for this initiative, together with important people in this process, for the Instituto João Clementi, so that we would be able to learn together. And also like to thank the Justice Court of the State of São Paulo, Dr. Egberto, Dr. Marcela, Dr. Renata. All of them are building this together with us. And I'd also like to name each person that I was able to remember. I hope to not be forgetting anyone, but I have Kellen, Maria, Gabi, Juliana, Estela, Beatriz, Stephanie, Jumara, Josiani, all of these people and more who are together in this process of development, institutional development, trying to understand how it's possible to enable restorative justice and this whole logic of restorative justice in this space, in this environment of our institution of the IJC, and how restorative justice can complement everything that's already being carried out in the services we provide, which are so important, in trying to guarantee people's rights. And the people who offer times in their lives in order to fight for the guarantee of rights and to build things institutionally and socially. So I'd like to start this way, by honoring everyone and by locating myself in this space. So I am a psychologist by education, and ever since the beginning of my professional career, I was always a technician for the guarantee of rights. And together, within this practice, I learned about restorative justice, and I'm learning with restorative justice. So when the technical workers at Instituto João Clementi, the IJC, bring about all the complexity of this reality and talk about all these concepts, I often think, oh my God, I've seen so much in my life, but I have so much more to learn, just so much to learn. And I'd like to talk a little bit about this place as a facilitator inside restorative practices. And I was thinking a lot about this yesterday and today as I was listening to everyone. In all the genders. This is something new. Todos is the neutral term for everyone in Portuguese that she's mentioning. And really, we shouldn't say that, we shouldn't even have to say that restorative justice isn't just a practice, because I often see myself as a facilitator and I'm thinking about the structure of the second case, for instance, that Erica and Maria presented. And I just think of it and I see that I'm extremely ignorant when I'm dealing with this case. And I'm trying to facilitate this process for these restorative procedures. And I've been working with this for at least 12 years now. And I still see how much I need to look at myself and understand how I'm going to contribute to the structuring of a space to foster people to really be a safe harbor for people. And I know that I'm going to try to understand the context and the violence that comes in from this context, and how these violences may pass through me. So to let you understand, I'm going to talk about an experience with Maria and Erica. When we went to the first pre-circle meeting with this young man, I was asking these guiding questions, and I asked these questions oftentimes I had to try and explain these questions many times. And Maria just told me, Sabrina, you need to be a little more assertive. You need to be a little more imposing. Otherwise, you won't be able to establish this communication. And so I said, all right. So we can talk about how we can facilitate this pre-circle meeting and create a space of understanding of the needs and feelings of this young man, and how we're going to connect based on this logic of restorative justice, these principles that are presented by restorative justice. And then Maria can do this intervention, because I don't know how to do that, how to be more assertive, I guess. I don't know how to speak in an assertive manner to this young man. And so it's very important to understand that facilitators it's not important for them to just understand about restorative justice or understand about the structure of restorative practices, but that is very important. I'm not saying that's not important, but it's also important to understand what is the context, not only of the person with disability, but the whole institutional context that we have and the role of each institution and where we're actually situated. So it's not just, okay, now I'm doing a course, I've already learned how to do restorative practices. No, you need to understand and engage yourself with this context, with the structure that you're going to create, and the viability and preparation for dealing with the specificities of each proposal, of each project, of each individuality, so that we can respect the individuality of all the different people who are involved. So I also want to talk a little bit about the process of honoring relations. When we're thinking about restorative practices and this preparation of the pre-circle meetings, how important it is to understand the context and the social markers that Erica talked to us about, to understand what Maria mentioned. It's great that facilitators speak in the first person, because certainly, you know, I'm sure that I'm ableist and that I'm sexist and that I'm racist. I'm sure of it, and so many other violences that end up passing through myself, and I need space to identify these violences and to be aware of them as a facilitator. And so I open up a space for connection and relationship building based on the individuality of each person involved in this context, which in this case is the family. So this young man and his family. And doing this is something, there's a lot of responsibility involved. And it's something that you must do like a craft, like something artisanal. You don't just get a lot of people and put them together in a room. You need to understand everyone's individualities, everyone's particularities, and create a space to, in the pre-circle meetings, for us to understand whether it's possible to identify these particularities. So when Maria talks about this logic of ableism, both the mother and the father have this within them. In the pre-circle meetings, when we're building up this restorative procedure, we're going to try to come to a place that has to do with accountability. And accountability doesn't come from judgment, doesn't come from punishment or guilt. It comes from a process of accountability in which maybe we can reach a person in which the people can identify what everyone feels, what each person needs, so that each person can be connected to this, and so that they can be together and build something beyond what has happened thus far, to understand whether there's the possibility of building these relations from everyone's best sides, so that everyone can be what they are together and coexist based on such a place. So we have a lot to build still in this second case, a lot to learn in this second case. And we must learn about this in all of these dimensions, both as in relation to the role of a facilitator in restorative practices, and also learning about the context of restorative justice, understand about the guaranteeing of rights and the struggle for rights for persons with disabilities, and the institutional context and the network of institutions that are in connection to our own institution, and also to learn with all of this construction about what our results will be, what each of these experiences will be like. So I think that we're still experimenting with restorative justice within the Technical Support Center of the IJC. And I'd like to deeply thank you all for this opportunity to listen to Maria, to listen to Kellen, to listen to Erica, to listen to Daniella. I mean, I really learned so much. It was a lesson. And it's great to develop this construction with them. I learn more about restorative justice each day working with them. And I'd also like to bring something. I really like social pedagogy, social teaching, and I love Paulo Freire. And I want to bring about, mention a quote. I'm going to close up my speech. It's not really a conclusion. It's more of a thought, a reflection, something to think about. Just an invitation, let's say, so that each person can identify a little bit inside themselves these power relations and how much it really catches my attention is that many moments they talk about power relationships and in their speeches. And I just like to leave an invitation so that we may think about what is our place and constantly map this, constantly identify this in the way that we act, no matter where we work, no matter what we work with. It's important for us to map this. And I'm actually going to quote Leonardo Boffi from the preface of a book called The Education of Hope, which is something has to do with the pedagogy of the oppressed from Paulo Freire. The pedagogy of the oppressed is not a pedagogy for the oppressed, or it's a script for people with solidarity and goodwill should use in order to free those who are oppressed. That's not it. It's a pedagogy that allows the oppressed to express themselves to themselves and to the oppressor in order to get a new balance and to have a new history and a new practice where we have dialogue amongst everyone with everyone else so that we have more solidarity, opportunity, and love. So my desire is that all of us should open up the space of learning, the space of understanding, of living together, of conviviality. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to speak, and now I'd like to pass the word on to Thomas.
Thank you, Sabrina. I think you've provided a very humble reminder that we must always be mindful and present. And I'm sure as we're mindful and present and reflect on how we emotionally are guided into this work. So thank you for sharing your observations, personal thoughts, and wrapping up with Paulo Freire. And thank you for your contributions, Maria, as well. We have roughly 30 minutes left, so I want to bring two outstanding professors from the University in Serbia, Gianna Mirozi and Professor Chiara Parini.
Yes, good evening, everybody. I'm talking together with my colleague, Grazia Mannozzi.
Good evening, everybody from Italy. I'm pleased and honored to participate in this seminar. And first of all, I would like to deeply thank the organizers. Some of them are friends, I think to Katia, but also to Carla and Professor Salm. Thank you, Joao, for this extraordinary opportunity. I introduce myself. I am a white woman, middle age. I have brown hair, shoulder length, and green eyes, or something in between brown and green. A typical Italian woman, I could say, but actually also a typical Greek woman, since 65% of my DNA is common to that of the Greeks. So today I work from home. Behind me there are many books, mainly criminal law books, and also an antique Chinese black lacquered panels representing roses and small birds made of mother of pearl. And I choose them because they give me serenity. This afternoon I will present with my colleague Chiara Perini, who teaches criminal law and restorative justice at the University of Insubria. Personally, I apologize in advance for any mistake since English is not my native language. So we would like to share with you some postcards from restorative justice. I'm going to share the screen, and maybe you are able to see it, right? Okay. So let's start. Let's start from today. Today is the 9th November, and in Europe it is the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. World events often move fast, but it's hard to match the pace and power of change in 1989. It culminated in one of the most famous scenes in the recent history, the fall of the Berlin Wall. The wall may be seen as a symbol of separation, freedom limitation, deprivation, and inequalities. More than 30 years later, the COVID pandemic has helped me to understand more clearly the inequalities we live with and the structures which support their perpetuation. So our speech will move from an assumption. We have now one more reason to foster the adoption of a restorative approach, a restorative philosophy, as our Zara said at the beginning of this seminar. Now more than ever, the world needs positive solutions and remedies, and we are convinced that restorative justice is an essential and powerful part of that vision. In order to start, we will propose a definition of disability, and keeping this in mind, we will address the issue of restorative justice and persons with disability by telling two stories. They will help to understand our dual perspective. The first one, disability as the cause of a crime, and the second one, disability as a result of a crime. Chiara.
Yes, Grazia, may I first introduce myself just briefly? I'm speaking from Italy too. I'm a white woman. I'm 46 years old. I have brown hair pulled up in a ponytail today. I have blue eyes and I wear glasses. I am in my apartment in Milan, and I speak to you sitting on my desk. Besides me, there is a large brown wooden bookcase full of colored books and notebooks. I am very grateful to Professor Salm and all the organizers for this opportunity too, which is a real honor for me. And of course, I apologize for my English, because also on my side, English is not my mother language. So coming back to our presentation, we first of all looked at the notion of disability according to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and to the International Classification of Functioning Disabilities and Health by the World Health Organization. According to these sources, disability is an umbrella term for impairments, activity limitations, and participation restrictions. It denotes the negative aspects of the interaction between an individual with a health condition and that individual's contextual factors, environmental and personal factors. Therefore, the word disability alludes to the situation that arises from the complex relationship between an individual's health condition and the personal and environmental factors that represent the circumstances in which the individual lives. Next, Grazia, please. In this sense, the word disability should be considered within a multidimensional perspective, which is not limited only to organic factors defined as functions and body structures, but takes into account the environmental factors that can affect a person's life, as well as the individual's possibilities in the field of activities and participation. The previous one, Grazia, please. Okay. In a perspective dedicated to number 4. Okay, thank you, sorry. In a perspective dedicated to restorative justice and people with disabilities, it is very important that ICF emphasizes the individual's residual abilities in the different context of life, rather than the degree of disability. In fact, it is on the enhancement of these abilities that inclusion and the possibility of creating dialogue and relationships are based. Another key word in the notion of disability is facilitator, and this is a key word within the restorative justice horizon too. The next one. In the notion of disability, environmental factors refer to all aspects of the external or extrinsic world that form the context of an individual's life, and as such have an impact on that person's functioning. In a perspective dedicated to RJ and people with disability, within such environmental factors, we should specifically underline the importance of support and relationships, attitudes, services, systems, and policies. In conceiving disability, in order to create a bond with restorative justice, it is crucial also the field named activities and participation. Within activities and participation factors, and looking at restorative justice, we should emphasize the relevance of communication, interpersonal interactions and relationships, community, social, and civic life. Next one, please. The link between disability and crime can be twofold. Disability can make a person vulnerable and expose him/her to the risk of discrimination, abuse, and victimization. Or disability can be the effect caused by a crime. In relation to these two perspectives, we tell you two stories that happened in Italy. The first one is Miriam's story. Miriam was able to tell her story and be believed and saved when she was already 35 years old. As a child, Miriam had a cognitive disability and a congenital form of very severe myopia. She lived with her family in a small town in northern Italy with her parents, who, instead of taking care of her, bet her, raped her, prostituted her, sold her, forced her to have 2 abortions. All this in the silence of everyone, even the neighbor. The second story is the story of Manuel. On the night between the 2nd and the 3rd of February 2019, Manuel, a young athlete on the Italian swimming team, was shot during an assault on the suburbs of Rome and was paralyzed due to a spinal cord injury. 2 young men confessed that they had shot him by mistake. They were sentenced to 16 years imprisonment. Meanwhile, Manuel continues his rehabilitations and hopes to walk again in the future. Grazie.
Thank you, Chiara. We started with these 2 stories to focus our attention on these 2 possibilities, disability as a cause of crime and disability as a result, as a consequence of a crime. So let's say what may happen. According to the Australian Human Rights Commission, people with disability are overrepresented in the justice system, both as victims and offenders. And very often the justice system fails in caring for them. Let's start with disability as a cause of a crime. And I would like to share with you the typical escalation of victimization. We start with indifference, and then we can move with humiliation, hate speech, assault, battery, mistreatment, physical or sexual abuse, like in the Miriam story, serious or very serious injuries, even mercy killing and suicide. People also can be sequestered at home or in a nursing home, and murder. The consequences of victimization may be sense of loneliness, sense of helplessness, incomprehension, discomfort, abasement, shame, fear, emotional suffering, physical or psychological injuries, or physical or psychological trauma, and even death. In this case, disability is a factor which can encourage victimization. But we have also another perspective when disability is a result of victimization. In this case, we can have some common effects, but also different effects. In this case, we have, of course, suffering, serious in the Manuel stories, people can have economic losses, and would like to underline the feeling that something is changed, a feeling of before and an after. Change in lifestyle and habits, and different vision of future and opportunities. Modification of relationship. Of course, the effects of victimization leave some open and unresolved issues. Suddenly, practical consequences arises, so people have to manage with those consequences. There is a diminished autonomy, the interruption of education or employment, medical expenses, but also legal expenses to, of course, to be in the trial, and support expenses. The consequences of a crime affect not only the victim, but also his or her family. And also the family has to be helped in coping with this new reality. How restorative justice deals with person with disability after a crime or before a crime?
Como
Of course,
como a justiça
restorative
restaurativa lida com as
justice
pessoas
has
com
to be
deficiência
adapt
antes ou
with
depois de um
these
crime?
multiple
A justiça
factors.
restaurativa tem que adaptar com esses
We
fatores
should
múltiplos.
focus on what
Nós
skills
devemos
does
focar em
participation in
quais
a restorative justice program
habilidades
require, but also with
participar de
problematic issues.
uma justiça
So let's
restaurativa
start with the skills.
necessita e também questões problemáticas. Então
It's
vamos falar primeiro
important
das
that
habilidades.
people with
É
disability
importante
understand the meaning
que
of
as
the path. We
pessoas
should be
com
sure
deficiência
that they
entendem
are able to
o significado
understand
desse
what
caminho. A gente tem que se
is
assegurar
the
que eles
meaning
estão
of
entendendo
participating in a victim offender
do-
mediation in a circle or
realmente do
in another
sentido de
restorative
participar de círculo.
Modality. The valid expression of consent, it is another sensitive issue. The ability to retract the consent. Are they able to offer an attentive, active, and empathetic listening? The ability to express one needs, but also evaluating the restorative offer. The mediators and facilitator don't decide about the right compensation, apologies, and so on. But let's see what are the problematic issues with respect to restorative justice. First of all, understanding the meaning of the path. It's an open issue. There is also an uncertain ability to express consent, difficulties in retracting it, storytelling skills and perception, how they are able to listen, how they are able to have the strong voice that restorative justice needs. Attentive, active, empathetic listening may depend on ability, vulnerability, but also on power imbalance. And mediators and facilitators have to be well trained to cope with these difficulties. Understanding or expressing one's needs is another open issue. And of course, the evaluation of the reparation. Let's see. What can restorative justice offer to victims with disabilities? I think that restorative justice may offer much more than the criminal justice system, because the criminal justice system has no way to deal with emotion, wishes, feelings, and everything which is around the crime. So restorative justice may offer listening, may offer an affective language and not a technical language, may offer trust and confidence. I'm using both words according to the European Directive 29 of 2012, but also sense of protection, safe relationships, empowerment, acknowledgement, and reparation. If we could imagine a pyramid like the Maslow pyramid, we can see the different needs of persons with disability. And the criminal justice system may offer compensation and so may cope with psychological needs or safety and practicalities. But restorative justice may promote social inclusion, lack of prejudice, and dignity. And how can I say, according to Kant, there are things who has a price and things who has a dignity. And what don't have a price, it is because it has a dignity. So I think we can move on. Chiara, I give you the floor.
Adopting a broadly inclusive approach. Considering the characteristic of restorative justice, An open question could be also be the following. Does restorative justice also serve the family of the person with disability, and maybe in some cases more the family than the individuals we are focusing on? The next one, Grazia. Considering international laws in the European juridical area, we may focus a few points which refer to our issue. For instance, in the recommendation by the Council of Europe number 8, 2018, we could consider rule number 26, where the Council of Europe affirms that restorative justice shall not proceed with those who are not capable for any reason of understanding the meaning of the process. Therefore, we can argue that it is essential in a pathway of restorative justice involving a person with disability to put the person with disability in a position to understand the restorative justice process by means of a specific language and by means of actions functional to communication. We could also consider Rule 40, where the Council of Europe says that the facilitators should be recruited from all sections of society. So we could argue that mediators should include also people with disabilities in order to be beside people with disability, also in a real sense, in a practical sense. Then we could consider rule number 42, where the Council of Europe says that the facilitator should receive initial training and should have a high level of competence and specific requirements of working with the victims, offenders, and vulnerable persons. So we could conclude that facilitators should receive a specific training also to deal with the people with disability. On the side of the offender, we could consider the directive number 800/2016 of the European Union on procedural safeguards for children who are suspected or accused person in criminal proceedings. Here, the European Union affirms that an individual assessment of the offender should consider any specific vulnerabilities of the child, such as learning disability and communication difficulties. Therefore, an offender with a disability should be the subject of a specific assessment, taking into account this particularly health condition. The next one, Grazia. And also among the so-called soft laws, international soft laws, we could find a few points which refers to our issue. For instance, in the UN Handbook on Restorative Justice Programs, edition 2020, we could focus on 3 points. When the handbook talk about restorative conferences, the UN says that more than one facilitator could be used to account for specific disabilities. So when a person with a disability is involved in the RJ process, an ad hoc facilitator may be involved to support this person. According to the basic competencies for facilitator, the UN pointed out the necessity to treat people fairly and impartially without discrimination on the basis of ability and disability. Therefore, facilitator should be prepared to treat with the person with disabilities fairly and impartially without discriminatory acts. And at the end, with regard to the risk mitigation in cases involving serious victimization, we could argue that, as with the child victims, special attention should be paid to obtain the consent by a person with disability, which must be based on full information and must be genuine. Furthermore, to support the person with disability, for example, a mental disability, the presence of a legal representative could be necessary. The next one, grazie. Summing up, we noticed that there is scarce relevance of disabilities in the European supranational sources concerning restorative justice, and there are few indications about how to deal with disabilities in soft law acts concerning restorative justice. With this picture, we would like to point out that juridical barriers could influence also the possibility of restorative justice to help people with disability. So we have to work at the international law level first in order to make the attention to this topic increasing. Grazie.
Thank you, Chiara. We are going to conclude, given this consideration, which path should we follow? Restorative justice, criminal law, anti-discrimination laws. Restorative justice is an healing justice, a justice who promotes healing, but without a real juridical protection. And it is mainly focuses on victim. Criminal law offers juridical protection with no emotional care, and it is mainly focuses on an offender. And at the end, anti-discrimination laws, they offer recognition of rights on a juridical level, but they are principally focused on opportunity. What we believe is that we should work on the path of complementarity. And what restorative justice suggests, a few basic indications are to improve the individualized assessment of both the victim and the offender. And here the concept of intersectionality may help. Review the concept of indirect victim, including family members, defining according to best practices the concept of participation, pay particular attention to the first contact with disabled victims, but also disabled offenders, using an understandable language with a translation appropriate to the type of disability. Improve the training of mediator and facilitator. This is a key point because we really need very well trained mediator and facilitators as the European Recommendation 2018 requires. And then promote a dialogue that respects the person and his or her dignity. Dignity is, how can I say, a magic word because it is at the top of the pyramid of our needs. And as Chiara said before, including person with disability may be very, very important. The education, I really care for education. I'm a professor, so we all at all stages, in all kind of school, at every level, we should promote education based on a restorative language, a restorative approach. Over there said that restorative justice is mainly a philosophical and I may have the pedagogical approach to deal with relationship. I'm concluding. But concluding is a term that comes from Latin, cum claudere, which means closing. but it doesn't mean exactly that. Concluding is actually a form of mutual engagement. It means not only to sum up, but to carry out, to establish, to realize. So concluding is a form of engagement, and here and now we are together to improve how to take care of persons with disabilities, how to avoid discrimination, exclusion, how to guarantee right, access to justice, acknowledgement, equal opportunity, safe and acceptable living condition. But let me come back for 1 minute to the initial consideration about the Berlin Wall. It was on the 9 November that many people was together. But before that, in 1964, among the many personalities who visited the Berlin Wall, there was Martin Luther King. Let us be inspired by all those who have tenaciously and peaceably tried to break down the barriers of prejudice and inequality. This is my conclusive word. Chiara and I will want to thank you very much for attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Wow. That was really fantastic. And first, I want to thank Dr. Manozzi and Dr. Perini for their fabulous presentations from their universities. And I also want to thank the 7 other panelists from the Joe Clementi Institute, Federal University of Sao Paulo. And really, we have so many ongoing discussions to look forward to. I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue these conversations in the talking circles this afternoon. I know there's so many questions in the Q&A that we're not necessarily able to answer right now, but we'll take note of them and be able to discuss them further tomorrow. Make sure you come to the talking circles this afternoon after our break. The talking circles start at 12:30 Eastern time. If the co-facilitators could arrive a little bit earlier, around 12:15 Eastern time, that would be great. If you haven't yet registered for the talking circles and you would like to participate in either the Portuguese or the English circles, we want to make sure you have the opportunity to register for these exciting conversations this afternoon. Again, 12:30 Eastern time. I'm not sure the Brazilian time. Katia, if you could let me know the time in Brazil. If it's 12:30 Eastern, it is
14h30 no Brasil. Das 14h30 até as 17h.
2:30 p.m. in Brazil until
okay.
5 p.m.
Great. Again, thank you for these amazing and exciting morning sessions and presentations. So much information for us to process, consider, and discuss in our continued conversations. Enjoy your break. We'll see you very soon for the talking circles this afternoon. Bye-bye for now.